This video is for anyone who is new to sewing and stepping into the sewing world for the first time. Welcome. Sewing is the best. You may have questions about patterns. So in this video, I'm going to show you where do you get the patterns, how to cut them out, how to read them, which is very important, and how to lay them out on your fabric. And I'll break up the video into chapters, that way you can find the part that has the answers that you're looking for. So you can get patterns in two different ways, either physical or digital. The physical ones, of course, in a store, usually comes in a little package like so. And when you take out the pieces, it usually is this massive piece of this like tissue kind of paper. You need to then find out with the diagram which size you are, and you need to cut out all the pieces. That's one way of getting a pattern. The other way is digital. There's so many patterns online now. There's free or on Etsy. There's also pattern websites. Now with the digital pattern, once you buy it online, you get emailed the link that you have to download. The download comes with a manual, and then usually it has two other formats, and one is A0 and one is A4 or US letter. Now A0 is very large. This is something you have to get printed at a local print shop. It's not something you can print on a regular at-home printer. So this is a pattern I just got printed. As you can see, it's a very large paper. This one cost me 10 euros per page, and it was 3 pages. So it's definitely the more expensive route, but you do have the luxury of it being on one piece of paper. With the next one is A4 or US letter. Usually you can use the A4 file to print on both formats. There's just a slight difference. US letter is a little bit smaller. But this one you can print at home, and you need to just do a little bit of work because you need to actually tape all the pieces together before you can even cut out your pattern. Now you may notice a little something. This is my logo because this is going to be my very first pattern that I am releasing, which is the flower bag pattern. I'm releasing the flower bag pattern on March 19th. But if you want early access, you can sign up to my newsletter. I always give my newsletter subscribers early access. And now that I have Patreon, I will also give my patrons early access as well. I'll link them both down below. You can sign up for whatever one you want. The newsletter is free, but I will send early access to both. So if you want to make a flower bag for yourself, a lot of you guys have asked for this pattern, then don't forget to sign up below. I'm really excited. Next week, we're going to do a tutorial for this, and I'll walk you through how to make one for yourself. And something to note that's very important when you are printing your pieces, either at home or at a local print shop, is to make sure it's at 100% scale and that it's on one side only. We don't want any double-sided things because that won't help us. So you printed off your pattern, all you have is a stack of papers. Some patterns have all the pieces in numerical order. I did this on my pattern. I felt like it's very helpful, but not everyone does this. So you lay them all out in numerical order. That way you know what you're taping together. And I'm going to show you a little trick that I do with another pattern that I have not taped together yet. But a little trick that I do, I actually trim down the one side. It just helps seeing the pattern so much better. So I usually trim down the right side because this is just a margin. So when you put it together, it overlaps just a little bit, and you can see that the lines are all matching up perfectly. Now when I tape in the middle of the piece so that when I cut out, the piece is stuck together. And continue on the next piece also this way, and you can trim off one side as well, as long as you can see visibly where the lines go. So once you have it all tiled together, it's time to cut out your pattern. And something I learned about cutting in fashion school, yes, they teach you about cutting, is that you always want your scissor to stay on the table. We don't cut anything in the air, always on the table. You have way more of a steady hand on the table, way more control, and you always want the pattern on the left side of your scissor. That way you can cut closer to the line, again, more controlled. Now all your pattern pieces are cut out, and I'm going to teach you the labeling on the pattern pieces because every piece is labeled with a bunch of information. I'm going to show you the labeling on the jacket that I printed out that's on that massive piece of paper because it has all the labels that I want to show you. So on this pattern piece, we always have the name of the company. So this one is from Puff and Pencil. Then we have this line that goes all the way. This is called a grain line. This is very, very important for when we are laying it on the actual fabric. Then we have the name of the item. This is the bomber jacket. What this actual pattern piece is, this is sleeve part 1, because there's also a sleeve part 2. Then it says to cut 2 times, so we need 2 of these pieces mirrored. And then of course they add a note that just says the pattern includes the 1 centimeter of seam allowance. Not all patterns do, but they do for this one. Then we have these little lines here. This is a notch. You have to cut a little line on your pattern piece because it helps you line up when you're sewing. Not all pattern pieces have the same information, so you need to make sure you read every pattern. This one has the name of the item. This is the rib waistband. Then it says to cut 2 times on the fold, but in 2 different fabrics. So first you have 1 in the rib fabric and then 1 in the additional stretch fabric. So you need 2 of these pieces, but in 2 different fabrics. And then as for the grain line, it actually says to cut 2 on the fold. On this fold here it says, and this is the direction of the grain again. Sometimes you'll see some pattern pieces that say cut oneself, which means your fashion fabric, the exterior of the item, 1 lining, which of course you know as the interior of your item, and 1 fuse or interfacing. And that is the fabric that has glue on the back of it that you actually glue to specific pieces to add more stability. So what are grain lines and what does it mean to cut on the fold? I will show you with little diagrams, okay? It makes it a bit easier. So to understand grain lines, we need to understand fabric. So this paper is our fabric. You'll see the squiggly lines on the sides. This is actually what we call the selvage edge. It's spelled actually 2 different ways, North America versus Europe, but they're both correct. Some examples of selvage edges, they don't always look the same. They're a little bit different. This one clearly you can see it's a different color. We have one on this. It's a different weave completely from the rest of the fabric. And this one is a little different. It looks the same as the rest of our fabric, but you'll see all these little holes, and that's just from when it was attached to the loom. So this is also the selvage edge. So we have 2 different weaves. First we have the warp, which is the vertical and always parallel to the selvage edge. This is the stronger weave. Then we have a weave called weft, and this is perpendicular to the selvage and it goes from left to right. A way to remember warp and weft is weft rhymes with left, so therefore it goes left to right. So when we are folding our fabric, we always fold it selvage edge to selvage edge. Now you can have the print of your fabric facing out, or you can do it the other way, facing in. For me, it depends what I'm cutting. If I am placing something strategically with the fashion fabric, I prefer to see the pattern. So with the grain lines, we have 2 main grain lines. We have the first one, which is the straight, and the second one, which is on the fold. Now with the straight one, we commonly see it on pieces like the front. So here you will see there's a line going vertical. So you're going to turn it and you're always going to put the grain line parallel to the selvage edge. So it runs along the warp weave, the strongest weave of the fabric. You can put it anywhere on the fabric, it doesn't matter, as long as the grain line is parallel to the selvage. To be sure that's completely parallel, you can take a ruler or a measuring tape and you can measure from the selvage edge to your grain line to be sure that it's parallel. So you measure at the bottom of the grain line. In my little diagram, it's 3 inches. And then if we go and measure the top of the grain line, we want to make sure it's also at 3 inches. Now for the next grain line, it's called on the fold, and we commonly see this on pieces like the bag. Again, we're going to turn it, and this time we're going to put it directly on the fold of the fabric. Remember that we folded the fabric in half? Exactly where the fabric is folded is what it means when it says on the fold, and you're going to make sure it's exactly on that edge. Now this can only go up and down on that edge. Sometimes a pattern requires a lot of pieces on the fold, and we can refold our fabric with the selvages meeting in the middle. That way, if we put, say, this one on the fold here, We can also, let's pretend this one is on the fold, put it on the other side like so. Because if we keep it like the first way, if this is on the fold and this piece is on the fold, all of that space of the fabric is just wasted. So it's best to do like so. Now that you have all the information about your pattern, let's cut out a pattern together. I'm going to do my flower bag pattern, but I'm going to cut it out of this fabric. So the first thing you're going to do is find the selvage edge, and you're going to put both selvage edges together and fold the fabric in half. When you lay it on your table, just smooth it out with your hands, making sure that it's perfectly lined up. Okay. Then you're going to grab your pattern pieces. Now, I always start with the biggest pattern pieces, and then the small ones I put in after because you can kind of fit them in all the dead space. So for me, this is the actual flower bag, and this one has the grain line of on the fold. So as you know now, I'm going to line it up on my folded edge of the fabric. Now you can either pin your pattern pieces in place, you can put weights on your pattern pieces. I like to use weights personally. I try to minimize my use of pins. And if you're nervous about your pattern piece moving or anything, you can also trace out your pattern piece on the fabric using tailor's chalk. Sometimes I use pencil, but that doesn't come off if you make a mistake. So tailor chalk is your best bet, and you can just simply line out your fabric. That way you can take the pattern piece off, it's still there, and you can see it all laid out before you actually cut the fabric. Now I'm going to lay out the other pattern pieces. This one is a very long strap, and it has a straight grain line, and it only says to cut 2. So we're gonna line it up at the top of my fabric here, parallel to the selvage. And to make sure it's in place, I will measure from the selvage edge to the grain line with my ruler. And the last piece for me is this little tie. This one is also on the straight grain, but this one says cut 4. So I need to make sure that I lay this out 2 different times. So I need to make sure that I'm ending up with 4 afterwards. So your pattern pieces are ready, they're pinned or traced out and ready to be now cut out. And we're going to use the same technique that we did for cutting out the paper pattern, which is keeping our scissor on the table and the pattern piece to the left of the scissor. This just gives you a way cleaner cut, and it gives you a lot more control when you are cutting. Now all your pattern pieces are cut, and remember, if you want to make your own flower bag, the pattern is coming out next week on March 19th, and you can sign up to the newsletter down below to be notified first. I hope you learned something this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. I also want to do one how-to video a month, so if you have other things that you want to learn or you have suggestions, let me know down in the comments below, and I will try to make a video for you. All the best with your sewing project, and I will see you next week. Bye!